The entire village watched in stunned silence as massive scaled wings blotted out the sun, casting long shadows over their homes. The beast that had once been a small, injured creature Logan had nursed back to health now descended from the sky with dozens of its kin, placing themselves between the village and the approaching enemy army. In that moment, everyone who had mocked the boy's strange compassion for wild creatures realized their salvation would come from the very kindness they had ridiculed. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I always love chatting with you, and it really helps support the channel. Also, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. The remote village of Emberdale sat nestled between ancient forests and towering mountains, a place where traditions ran as deep as the roots of the thousand-year trees surrounding it. This was where Logan Reed had spent all 12 years of his life, under the disapproving gaze of neighbors who found his affinity for wild creatures disturbing and unnatural. On a crisp autumn morning, Logan trudged along a narrow dirt path leading into the forest, his small frame burdened by a worn leather satchel. The villagers watched with familiar disdain as he departed for his daily wanderings. Behind him, whispers followed like persistent shadows. "There goes the beast boy again," muttered Owen Porter, the village blacksmith, his massive arms crossed over his chest. "Nothing good will come of his strange ways." "Nee." The village elder, Hannah Sullivan, clicked her tongue in disapproval. His parents would be ashamed if they could see what he's become. The Reed family has produced proud hunters for generations, not creature coddlers. Logan quickened his pace, pretending not to hear. He'd grown accustomed to their words, sharp as they were. His parents had died 3 winters ago during a brutal ice storm, leaving him in the reluctant care of his uncle, Mason Reed, the village's most accomplished hunter. Mason had tried to mold Logan into a proper heir to the Reed legacy, but the boy showed neither talent nor interest in hunting. Instead, he displayed an uncanny ability to communicate with the forest creatures, earning him scorn from nearly everyone in Emberdale. Once deep enough in the forest that the village sounds faded away, Logan's shoulders relaxed. Here, among the whispering leaves and chattering wildlife, he felt truly at home. Small creatures emerged from hiding spots as he approached. Squirrels scampered down tree trunks, birds alighted on branches near his head, and even the typically shy foxes watched him with curious eyes rather than fear. "Hello, friends," Logan said softly, reaching into his satchel to scatter seeds and berries on the ground. "I've brought breakfast." As the animals gathered around him, Logan noticed something unusual. The forest creatures seemed agitated today, their movements jerky and anxious. The birds chirped in short, urgent bursts rather than their usual melodic songs. "What's wrong?" he asked, kneeling down as a rabbit hopped nervously at his feet. The animal's ears twitched rapidly, its nose quivering. Logan had learned to read the forest's moods through its inhabitants, and something was definitely amiss. A sudden rustling from a nearby thicket caught his attention. The smaller animals scattered instantly, but Logan remained still, watching as the bushes parted. A pair of gleaming amber eyes peered out at him from the shadows, followed by a scaled snout and a long serpentine neck. Logan's breath caught in his throat. He had heard tales of such creatures, but had never seen one himself. The legends called them worms, smaller relatives of the mighty dragons that had supposedly gone extinct centuries ago. Most villagers dismissed such stories as myths, but Logan's grandmother had told him they were real, just exceedingly rare and wary of humans. The creature slithered forward, revealing its full form. About the size of a large dog, its body was covered in iridescent scales that shifted between deep green and midnight blue, depending on how the sunlight hit them. 4 slender legs supported its serpentine body, ending in talons sharp enough to shred bark from trees. A ridge of delicate spines ran down its back, culminating in a fan-like tail tip. But what caught Logan's attention was the creature's wing. One was folded neatly against its body, while the other hung at an awkward angle, clearly injured. The worm regarded Logan with intelligent eyes, pain and wariness evident in its gaze. "You're hurt," Logan whispered, slowly reaching toward his satchel. The worm hissed softly, backing away. "It's okay," he soothed. "I won't harm you. I want to help." Moving with deliberate slowness, Logan retrieved a small jar of healing salve his grandmother had taught him to make before she passed away. The worm watched his every movement, muscles tensed to flee if necessary. "This will help your wing," Logan explained, uncapping the jar. The pungent scent of herbs filled the air. "It might sting a little at first, but then the pain will ease." For several long moments, neither moved. Then, surprising Logan, the worm inched forward, extending its injured wing slightly. Taking this as permission, Logan carefully applied the salve to the damaged membrane. The worm flinched but didn't retreat. "There," Logan said when he finished. "You should rest it for a few days. I'll bring you food so you don't have to hunt." As if understanding his words, the worm blinked slowly, then settled onto the forest floor, its injured wing extended to avoid pressure. Logan spent the next hour gathering fruits and catching small fish from a nearby stream, which the worm accepted gratefully. "I'll call you Azura," Logan decided, noting how the creature's scales reminded him of the sky at twilight. "I'll return tomorrow with more food and medicine." Azura made a soft trilling sound that Logan took as agreement. Reluctantly, he left the worm to return to the village before his absence was noticed. For the next 2 weeks, Logan visited Azura daily, bringing food and changing the dressing on her wing. The worm grew increasingly comfortable with his presence, eventually allowing him to stroke her scales and examine her wing more thoroughly. Logan was fascinated by her intelligence. She seemed to understand his words and even responded in her own way, through various chirps, trills, and body language. One afternoon, as Logan approached their meeting spot, he found Azura waiting for him with something clutched in her talons. As he drew closer, she extended her front leg, offering him the object, a scale, but not one of her own. This one was much larger, with a deep crimson hue that seemed to glow from within. "What's this?" Logan asked, carefully taking the scale. It was warm to the touch and surprisingly heavy for its size. Azura chirped and looked skyward, then back at Logan. She repeated this gesture several times until understanding dawned on him. "Is this from your family? From a dragon?" he whispered, awed. Azura made a sound that seemed affirmative. Logan examined the scale more closely, marveling at its beauty and the implications of its existence. Dragons weren't extinct, after all. They were real, and Azura was somehow connected to them. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said, carefully placing the scale in his satchel. Azura nudged his hand with her snout, a gesture that had become her way of showing affection. As Logan headed back to the village that evening, his mind was full of questions about Azura and the mysterious dragons she was apparently connected to. So distracted was he that he didn't notice the group of village boys waiting for him at the edge of the forest until it was too late. "Well, if it isn't Beast Boy," sneered Tyler Grant, the butcher's son and Logan's most persistent tormentor. At 15, Tyler was taller and stronger than Logan, and he used these advantages frequently. "Where have you been hiding all day? Talking to squirrels again?" 4 other boys flanked Tyler, all wearing identical smirks. Logan tried to walk past them, but Tyler stepped into his path. "What's in the bag, Reed?" Tyler demanded, reaching for Logan's satchel. "Stolen food for your animal friends?" Logan clutched his bag tighter, thinking of Azura's scale within. "Leave me alone, Tyler." "Or what? You'll set your woodland creatures on me?" Tyler laughed, shoving Logan backward. "I bet you've been stealing from our traps again, haven't you? Dad says someone's been messing with his snares. I would never touch your traps, Logan replied honestly. In fact, he did his best to warn animals away from hunting areas, but he never interfered with the traps themselves. Liar, Tyler growled, lunging forward and grabbing the satchel. Logan held on desperately, but Tyler's superior strength prevailed. The bag tore open, spilling its contents onto the ground, including the crimson dragon scale, which landed in the dirt with a heavy thud. All 5 boys fell silent, staring at the gleaming object. "What is that?" one of them whispered. Before Logan could respond, Tyler snatched up the scale. "Look at this! The freak's been hoarding treasures!" His eyes narrowed with greedy calculation. "This must be worth something. My father will know who'd pay good coin for it." "Give it back!" Logan shouted, launching himself at Tyler. The larger boy easily shoved him away, sending Logan sprawling in the dirt. "Finders keepers, beast boy," Tyler taunted, pocketing the scale. "Consider it payment for all the game you've scared away from our hunting grounds." Logan scrambled to his feet, desperate. "Please, Tyler, it's not mine to give away. It was entrusted to me." Tyler and his friends howled with laughter. "Entrusted to you? By what, a rabbit?" Tyler mocked. "Face it, Reed, you're nothing but a disappointment to your family's legacy. A Reed who can't hunt isn't a Reed at all." With that parting shot, the boys sauntered away, leaving Logan to gather his scattered belongings. His hands trembled with a mixture of anger and fear. How would he explain to Azura that he'd lost her precious gift? And what would Tyler do with the scale? The answer came sooner than expected. By the time Logan returned to the village square, a crowd had gathered around Tyler, who was proudly displaying the scale to gasps of wonder and speculation. "It must be from some exotic beast," declared Owen Porter, examining the scale with expert eyes. "Nothing like this exists in our mountains." "It's clearly valuable," added Julia Clark, the village merchant. "I could take it to the city traders next month. They'd pay handsomely for such a curiosity." Logan pushed his way through the crowd, heart pounding. "It's not yours to sell." All eyes turned to him, most filled with the familiar mixture of irritation and dismissal. "The boy claims some animal entrusted it to him," Tyler announced, prompting fresh laughter. Logan's Uncle Mason stepped forward, his weathered face tight with embarrassment and anger. "Logan, enough of this nonsense. If Tyler found this scale, then—" "He didn't find it. He took it from me," Logan protested. "And it's not just a scale, it's a dragon scale." The laughter grew louder. Even Mason couldn't maintain his stern expression. "Dragons?" scoffed Hannah Sullivan. "Next, he'll claim he's seen forest sprites and river nymphs." "I haven't seen dragons," Logan admitted, "but I've been helping an injured worm, and she gave me that scale as a gift. It belongs to her family." The square fell silent for a moment before erupting into even more raucous laughter. Children pointed at Logan, adults shook their heads, and Mason's face darkened with shame. "That's enough, nephew," Mason said firmly, gripping Logan's shoulder. "Go home. We'll discuss your imagination later." "But Uncle Mason—" "Now, Logan." Defeated, Logan turned away, the villagers' mockery following him like a physical weight. As he trudged toward home, he caught snippets of their conversation. "Always been strange, but this is beyond. Poor Mason saddled with such a need to grow out of these fantasies." Logan broke into a run, tears blurring his vision. He didn't stop until he reached the small cottage he shared with his uncle at the village's edge. Once inside, he flung himself onto his bed, frustration and helplessness washing over him in waves. How could he face Azura now? How could he explain that he'd failed to protect her gift? The next morning, Logan rose before dawn, determined to find Azura and confess what had happened. He slipped out of the cottage while his uncle still slept and hurried toward the forest. The pre-dawn air was crisp, carrying a strange scent, like ash and metal that hadn't been present the day before. As he approached the meeting spot, Logan called softly for Azura. To his relief, The worm emerged from behind a large boulder, her movements now graceful and unrestricted. Her injured wing had healed completely. "Azura," Logan began, kneeling before her, "I'm so sorry. The scale you gave me, some boys from the village took it. I tried to get it back, but they wouldn't listen." To his surprise, Azura didn't seem distressed. Instead, she circled him once, then looked skyward, making the same gesture she had when giving him the scale. This time, however, she seemed more insistent, even excited. "What is it?" Logan asked. "Are you trying to tell me something about your family, about the dragons?" Azura bobbed her head and made a series of chirping sounds. She then nudged Logan's chest with her snout before backing away and spreading her wings, both now fully functional to their impressive span. "You're leaving?" Logan realized, his heart sinking. Azura chirped again, flapping her wings experimentally. She seemed to be waiting for something, her gaze continually returning to the sky. "I understand," Logan said, fighting back tears. "You're healed now. You need to return to your family." He reached out to stroke her scales one last time, committing the sensation to memory. "Thank you for trusting me, Azura. I won't forget you." The worm pressed her head against his palm, then suddenly went rigid, her head snapping toward the direction of the village. Her spine stood erect, and a low hiss escaped her throat. "What's wrong?" Logan asked, instantly alert. Before Azura could respond, a distant sound reached them, shouting, followed by the clang of metal against metal. Logan's blood ran cold. Those were battle sounds. "The village!" he gasped, already turning to run. "Something's happening at the village!" Azura darted in front of him, blocking his path. She lowered her body and looked meaningfully from Logan to her back. "You want me to ride you?" he asked incredulously. Azura chirped impatiently, crouching lower. Taking a deep breath, Logan climbed onto her back, settling between her shoulder blades and gripping the ridge of spines that ran down her neck. "I'm ready," he said, though his voice trembled. Without further hesitation, Azura launched herself forward, racing through the forest with unexpected speed. Logan clung tightly as they wove between trees, the wind whipping his hair. They reached the forest edge in minutes, and what Logan saw made his heart stutter. The village was under attack. Dozens of armed men in strange armor were moving through Emberdale, forcing villagers from their homes at spear point. Their armor was unlike anything Logan had seen before, black as midnight with red symbols painted across the breastplates. They moved with military precision, corralling the terrified villagers into the town square. "Raiders," Logan whispered. Tales of such attacks had reached Emberdale before, but their remote location had always protected them. Until now. From their vantage point, Logan could see his fellow villagers being bound with ropes, their faces contorted with fear. Children cried for their parents, and the raiders responded with harsh shouts and occasional blows to silence them. "We have to help them," Logan said to Azura, his initial fear transforming into desperate resolve. The worm made a low, trilling sound that seemed to convey agreement, but she remained hidden in the tree line, watching the scene with calculating eyes. Then, to Logan's astonishment, she threw back her head and released a piercing cry that echoed across the valley. The sound was so unexpected and alien that even the raiders paused momentarily, scanning the forest edge with sudden wariness. The village elder, Hannah Sullivan, caught sight of Logan and the worm at the forest's edge, her eyes widening in disbelief. Azura's call faded, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then Logan felt it, a subtle vibration in the ground beneath them, growing stronger with each passing second. The raiders felt it too, their formations faltering as they struggled to maintain balance. "What magic is this?" shouted their leader, a tall man with a scarred face. The answer came from above. A shadow passed over the village, then another and another. Logan looked up, his mouth falling open in awe. Dragons. dozens of them, their massive wings blocking out the morning sun as they circled the village. They were magnificent creatures, 10 times larger than Azura, with scales in various hues: crimson, sapphire, emerald, gold, and silver. Their eyes glowed with ancient intelligence, and when they opened their massive jaws, Logan could see rows of teeth as long as daggers. One dragon, larger than the others with scales the exact shade of the one Azura had given Logan, broke from the formation and descended toward the village center. The raiders scattered in panic, some dropping their weapons to flee, others foolishly raising their bows. A few arrows bounced harmlessly off the great beast's scales. The crimson dragon landed with earth-shaking force in the village square, its massive tail sweeping several raiders aside like ragdolls. It surveyed the scene with eyes that burned like molten gold, then turned its gaze directly to where Logan and Azura waited at the forest edge. Azura chirped excitedly, bouncing on her feet. Without warning, she darted forward, carrying Logan with her toward the massive dragon. Logan's heart threatened to burst from his chest, partly from fear, partly from wild exhilaration. They stopped before the great dragon, which lowered its enormous head to inspect them. Up close, Logan could see that the crimson scales weren't solid in color, but contained swirls of deeper red and orange, like living flame captured in physical form. The dragon's breath was hot against his skin, smelling of smoke and something sweeter, like cinnamon. To the astonishment of everyone watching, raiders, villagers, and Logan himself, Azura chirped something to the great dragon, which responded with a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through Logan's very bones. Then, most shocking of all, the dragon spoke. Not in chirps or growls, but in words, heavily accented and rumbling, but unmistakably human language. "So you are the one who saved my daughter," the dragon said, its voice like thunder given form. "The one who showed kindness when others would have shown cruelty." Logan could only nod, words failing him completely. The dragon's massive head swung toward the bound villagers, who cowered in terror. "And these are the ones who mocked you for your compassion, who took the scale my daughter gifted you?" Logan found his voice at last. "Please don't hurt them," he pleaded. "They didn't understand. They're my people, even if they don't always understand me." The great dragon regarded him silently for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Compassion even for those who showed you none. Interesting." With a sweep of its massive tail, the dragon knocked aside the remaining raiders who hadn't fled. The other dragons had landed throughout the village, effectively trapping the invaders. "For centuries, we have watched your kind from afar," the dragon continued. "We withdrew from the world of humans when your ancestors hunted us for sport and trophy. We became legend, myth, believing humans incapable of seeing us as anything but beasts to be conquered." Its burning gaze fixed on Logan. "But then, my youngest daughter, curious about your kind, ventured too close to human lands and was injured. She would have died had you not shown her kindness." The dragon turned to address the villagers directly. "This boy, whom you ridiculed and ostracized, has earned the respect of dragonkind through his actions. His compassion has forged an alliance that will now save your lives." A murmur ran through the villagers, many of whom were staring at Logan with new eyes, shock, disbelief, and dawning respect replacing their usual disdain. Mason Reed stepped forward, his hunter's composure remarkably intact, despite facing a creature from legend. "Great dragon," he said, his voice steady. "We owe you our gratitude for saving us from these raiders, and—" He glanced at Logan, something like pride finally showing in his expression. "It seems we owe my nephew an apology as well." Tyler Grant pushed his way to the front, holding out the crimson scale with trembling hands. "I took this," he admitted. "I'm sorry." The dragon's daughter, Azura, chirped something that sounded suspiciously like laughter. The great dragon rumbled in response, then addressed the village again. "Keep the scale, human child. Consider it the first token of a new covenant between our kinds. For too long, dragons and humans have lived apart. Perhaps it is time for that to change." The dragon raised its massive head and released a thunderous roar that echoed across the mountains. The other dragons responded in kind, creating a chorus that seemed to shake the very air. When silence fell again, the dragon looked directly at Logan. "You have proven that not all humans are as we believed. In honor of your kindness to my daughter, we offer protection to this village. No raiders will trouble you again." As if on cue, the remaining raiders were surrounded by dragons, herded together, and marched out of the village under the watchful eyes of several winged guardians. "What will happen to them?" Logan asked. "They will be escorted far from these lands and warned never to return," the dragon replied. "We do not kill unnecessarily." The great beast then lowered its head once more, bringing one massive eye level with Logan. "And you, young human, have earned a place among us, should you wish it. My daughter has grown quite fond of you." Azura chirped happily, rubbing her head against Logan's side. Logan looked from her to the village, his home despite everything, then back to the magnificent creatures before him. "Can I visit both?" he asked hopefully. "I don't want to leave my uncle, but I'd like to learn more about dragons too." The great dragon made that rumbling laugh-like sound again. "A wise answer. So be it. You shall be the bridge between our kinds, the first dragon friend in many centuries." As the sun rose higher over Emberdale, villagers cautiously approached the dragons, wonder replacing fear in their expressions. Children reached out tentative hands to touch scales they had believed existed only in stories. Adults peppered Logan with questions about his time with Azura, genuine interest replacing their former mockery. Hannah Sullivan approached Logan, her usually stern face softened with remorse. "It seems we were wrong about many things," she admitted. "Your grandmother always said you had a special gift. I should have listened." Logan nodded, accepting her words without rancor. As he looked around at the dragons and villagers beginning their tentative interactions, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he didn't have to hide who he was or what he could do. For the first time, his difference wasn't a source of shame, but a bridge to something wondrous. Mason joined him, placing a hand on Logan's shoulder. "Your parents would be proud," he said simply. "I'm sorry I wasn't." "It's okay, Uncle Mason," Logan replied. "None of us knew dragons were real." "Not the dragons," Mason clarified. "They would be proud of your heart. Your mother always said true strength isn't in hunting, but in knowing when to show mercy." He squeezed Logan's shoulder. "She was right." Azura chirped, drawing their attention. She was looking skyward again, where several younger dragons were performing aerial acrobatics, their scales gleaming in the sunlight. "I think she wants you to join them," Mason said with a small smile. Logan looked questioningly at Azura, who lowered herself in invitation. With a grin that felt foreign on his face after so long, Logan climbed onto her back. This time, when she launched herself into the air, he wasn't afraid. As they soared above Emberdale, Logan saw his village from a new perspective, not as a place of rejection, but as the beginning of something extraordinary. The great crimson dragon rose to join them, its massive wings creating gusts that tousled Logan's hair. "The world is changing, young human," it rumbled, "and you have helped change it." As they flew together over mountains and forests, Logan realized that his grandmother had been right all along. Magic existed in the world, not just in dragons and worms, but in compassion, in understanding, and in the courage to be kind even when kindness was mocked. And sometimes, that was the greatest magic of all. The seasons changed, and with them, Emberdale transformed. 6 months had passed since the dragons had revealed themselves, and the village that had once ridiculed Logan Reed for his kindness to animals had become the center of an unprecedented alliance between humans and dragons. Travelers from distant lands now journeyed to witness the marvel of dragons and humans living in harmony, many departing with tales so fantastic that few believed them. On this particular morning, Logan stood atop the newly constructed watchtower at the village's edge, surveying the valley below. At 13 now, he had grown taller over the past months, his frame less slight than before. The constant flying with Azura had strengthened his body, and the respect he'd earned had straightened his once-hunched shoulders. "Any sign of them?" asked Tyler Grant, who had ascended the tower steps to join Logan. The relationship between the two boys had undergone a remarkable change. Where Tyler had once been Logan's chief tormentor, he was now something approaching a friend, or at least a respectful ally. "Not yet," Logan replied, scanning the horizon, "but they're rarely late. Today marked an important occasion, the formal signing of the Dragon Accord, a treaty between humans and dragons that would extend beyond Emberdale to include 3 neighboring villages. Representatives from those villages were already gathered in Emberdale Square, their initial skepticism fading as they witnessed the daily interactions between villagers and the smaller worms that now frequently visited. "Do you think the other villages will truly accept the alliance?" Tyler asked, voicing the concern that had been on many minds. Logan considered the question. "They'll need time, just as Emberdale did. But once they see the benefits—" He gestured to the flourishing fields below, where crops grew with unprecedented vigor thanks to dragonfire that had enriched the soil with minerals from the mountains. A shadow passed overhead, and both boys looked up to see Azura circling the tower. No longer the size of a large dog, she had grown considerably over the past months, now closer to the size of a horse. Her scales had deepened in color, shifting between midnight blue and emerald green in the morning light. "There's my cue," Logan said with a grin. "The delegation must be approaching." Without hesitation, he climbed onto the tower's edge and leaped into open air. Tyler gasped, despite having witnessed this many times before. Azura dived, positioning herself perfectly beneath Logan, who landed securely on her back. Together, they soared upward, their movements so synchronized that it seemed they shared a single mind. As they rose higher, Logan spotted what he'd been waiting for, a formation of larger dragons approaching from the east, the sunlight glinting off their scales in a dazzling display of colors. At their head flew the great crimson dragon that Logan now knew as Fyrax, father of Azura and leader of the mountain dragon clan. "They're here!" Logan called down to the tower, where Tyler was already ringing the signal bell. The village erupted into activity as people emerged from their homes, gazing skyward with anticipation rather than fear. Children pointed excitedly, calling out the names of dragons they recognized from previous visits. Logan and Azura flew to meet the approaching dragons, performing a traditional aerial greeting that Fyrax had taught them. 3 circles, followed by a steep climb and dive. Fyrax responded in kind, his massive wings creating gusts that tousled Logan's hair even from a distance. "Dragon friend," Fyrax rumbled as they drew closer, using the title that had become Logan's honorific among dragon kind. "The day of covenant has arrived." "We're ready," Logan replied, gesturing toward the village, where the central square had been prepared for the ceremony. A massive stone table, quarried from the mountains and transported by dragons, stood at its center, the dragon table, where the accord would be signed. As the dragons descended toward Emberdale, Logan noticed the expressions of the visiting dignitaries, a mixture of awe, fear, and wonder. Despite having been briefed on what to expect, nothing could truly prepare someone for their first encounter with a fully grown dragon. Hannah Sullivan, now serving as Emberdale's chief diplomat, stepped forward to greet the visitors. At 73, she remained formidable, though her once rigid views had softened considerably since the dragon's arrival. "Representatives of Pinecrest, Rivermouth, and High Vale," she announced formally, "may I present Fyrax, elder of the Mountain Dragon clan, and his kin." Fyrax landed with surprising delicacy for a creature of his size, folding his massive wings against his body. The ground trembled slightly beneath his weight as he inclined his head in a gesture of respect. "I bring greetings from dragonkind," he said, his deep voice carrying across the square. "For centuries, our kinds have lived apart, wrapped in misunderstanding and fear. Today, we begin to mend that ancient divide." Mayor Jared Collins of Rivermouth stepped forward, visibly struggling to maintain his composure. "How can we be certain this arrangement will benefit our villages as claimed? Dragons have been our enemies in legend for generations. Legends often begin in truth but grow distorted with time," Fyrax replied patiently. "Yes, there was conflict between our kinds long ago, but look around you, see what has been achieved in Emberdale through cooperation rather than conflict." Logan dismounted from Azura and joined the gathering, standing beside his uncle Mason, who now served as Emberdale's chief ranger, coordinating hunting grounds with dragon territories to prevent misunderstandings. "If I may," Logan said, addressing the visitors. "6 months ago, I was the village outcast because I showed kindness to animals instead of hunting them. When Azura was injured, I helped her instead of harming her. That single act of compassion has led to all you see today." He gestured around them, where the evidence of dragon-human cooperation was unmistakable. Homes with dragon-forged metal reinforcements that had withstood spring storms that would have previously destroyed them. Fields yielding twice their normal harvest, and most significantly, not a single raid since the dragons had declared their protection over the area. "The dragons offer knowledge and protection," Logan continued. "In return, they ask only for respect and safe haven in our territories." "And what happens when they decide the arrangement no longer suits them?" asked the representative from High Vale, a skeptical woman named Reese Franklin. "What prevents them from turning on us once they've fully integrated into our communities?" Fyrax's rumbling laugh startled the visitors. "If destruction were our goal, human, we could have achieved it centuries ago. Your villages survive because we allowed it, remaining in the mountains and deep forests, avoiding conflict. It is trust that we seek to build, not dominance." As the diplomatic discussions continued, Logan noticed a disturbance at the village's edge. A rider was approaching at high speed, his horse lathered with sweat. The guards at the perimeter allowed him through, and the man galloped directly to the square, dismounting in haste. "Warlord Darius has crossed the eastern ridge," the messenger announced, gasping for breath. "At least 200 fighters, heavily armed, heading directly for the valley. They've already burned the outlying farms." A murmur of alarm spread through the gathering. Darius was a name well known and feared throughout the region. A ruthless warlord who had been consolidating power by conquering smaller settlements, either incorporating them into his growing empire or destroying them outright if they resisted. "How long do we have?" Mason Reed asked, his hunter's instincts immediately assessing the threat. 3 hours, perhaps 4, the messenger replied. "They're moving quickly with mounted troops at the vanguard." The visiting representatives paled. "We should leave immediately," the Pinecrest delegate said, already backing toward his horse. "Return to our villages and prepare defenses." "Your villages lie in Darius's path," Fyrax stated calmly. "If Emberdale falls, you will be next." Standing together offers the greatest chance of survival. Logan exchanged glances with his uncle, both recognizing the precarious diplomatic situation. The Dragon Accord, so close to being formalized, now hung by a thread as fear threatened to unravel all they had worked toward. "This is precisely why we need the alliance," Logan said, stepping into the center of the gathering. "Alone, none of our villages could withstand Darius's forces. Together with the dragons, we have a chance not just to survive, but to end his threats permanently. Hannah Sullivan nodded in agreement. The boy speaks wisdom beyond his years. This is the very purpose of our proposed alliance, mutual protection against common threats. After a tense moment of deliberation, Mayor Collins of Rivermouth straightened his shoulders. Very well. Let this be the first test of our accord, though it comes before the ink is dry. Fyrax rumbled his approval. Wise decision. Now we must prepare. The next hours passed in a flurry of activity. The dragons and village leaders devised a strategy that played to both species' strengths. Villagers who couldn't fight were evacuated to caves in the mountainside, guarded by younger dragons. Those who could were armed and positioned strategically throughout Emberdale. Logan found himself in the midst of preparations, moving between human and dragon groups to facilitate communication. Azura remained by his side, her growing battle instincts evident in the way her spines stood erect and her pupils narrowed to slits. I want you to stay with the evacuees in the caves, Mason told Logan as midday approached. You've done your part bringing us together. The fighting should be left to others. Logan shook his head firmly. My place is with Azura. We can scout from above, warn of flanking movements. The dragons listen to me in a way they don't to others yet. Mason started to object, then looked at his nephew with new eyes. The boy he had once considered a disappointment to the Reed family legacy now stood before him with a quiet confidence that commanded respect. Your parents would be proud, Mason said finally. Just promise me you'll stay high, out of arrow range. Logan nodded, though both knew such promises in battle were rarely kept. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the first glimpse of Darius's army appeared on the eastern horizon, a dark mass moving steadily toward Emberdale. From his position high above on Azura's back, Logan could see the full extent of the approaching force. The messenger hadn't exaggerated. At least 200 fighters marched beneath Darius's banner, a black scorpion on a crimson field. It begins, Fyrax said, hovering nearby, his massive wings creating air currents that smaller dragons had to navigate carefully. Remember the plan. Let them approach the village before engaging. Surprise is our greatest advantage. The dragons retreated behind the mountains, out of sight from the approaching army. In the village below, defenders took their positions, many hands steady on weapons, despite the fear in their eyes. This would not be like the raider attack months ago. Darius was known for his tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency. As the warlord's forces drew closer, Logan could make out more details. The vanguard consisted of mounted soldiers in dark armor, while foot soldiers marched behind in tight formation. Siege engines were being dragged by teams of horses, smaller than those used against city walls, but more than adequate to demolish the wooden structures of Emberdale. Logan and Azura circled high above, hidden by clouds as they observed. When the army was approximately half a mile from the village, Logan spotted a small group breaking away from the main force, riders bearing a white flag of parley. They're sending negotiators, Logan called to Fyrax. Should we allow it? Yes, the great dragon rumbled. Let us hear their terms, though I doubt they will be acceptable. Logan relayed this decision to the village using a signal flag. Minutes later, the small delegation was permitted through the hastily constructed barricades at the village's edge. From his aerial vantage point, Logan recognized the central figure immediately. Warlord Darius himself, a tall man with a shaved head and a prominent scar running from his left eye to his jaw. The negotiation was brief. Even from above, Logan could see it was not going well. Body language told the story. Darius gesturing expansively toward the village, clearly making demands. Hannah Sullivan and the other leaders standing firm in refusal. When Darius and his men turned to leave, their movements radiated anger. They've rejected whatever terms were offered, Logan reported to Fyrax. "Darius is returning to his forces." "As expected," Fyrax replied. "Prepare yourself, dragon friend. When the attack begins, we will answer." The warlord's delegation had barely rejoined the main army when the advance began. Horns sounded, and the mounted vanguard surged forward, quickly covering the ground between them and the village. Behind them, archers nocked arrows, prepared to provide covering fire. "Now!" Fyrax roared, and the dragons emerged from their hiding places behind the mountains. What followed was unlike anything the region had ever witnessed. Dragons of all sizes descended upon Darius's forces like a storm of teeth, claws, and fire. The larger dragons targeted the siege engines, massive talons splintering wood and scattering soldiers. Smaller worms engaged the mounted troops, their agility allowing them to dart between riders, causing chaos in the formations. Logan and Azura dove toward a group of archers preparing to loose their arrows at the village defenders. Azura released a focused jet of flame that ignited their arrow shafts, sending the men scattering in panic. As they pulled up from the dive, Logan caught sight of Warlord Darius, who was staring skyward with an expression of utter disbelief. The battle raged across the valley floor. The initial advantage of surprise had given the Dragon-Human alliance the upper hand, but Darius's forces were disciplined and numerous. They quickly regrouped, forming defensive circles with spears pointing outward to ward off dragon attacks. Logan spotted a weakness in their formation, a gap where two units failed to connect properly. "There!" he shouted to a nearby group of dragons. "Between those two groups!" 3 dragons immediately exploited the opening, diving through the gap and breaking the formation from within. Village defenders followed, engaging the disorganized soldiers in close combat. As the battle continued, Logan noticed something alarming. A group of Darius's elite guards were escorting the warlord toward a covered wagon that had been kept at the rear of his forces. The wagon's canvas cover was pulled back to reveal what appeared to be a massive crossbow mounted on a swivel base. "Fyrax!" Logan called urgently. "They have some kind of weapon!" The great dragon turned his attention to the wagon just as the massive crossbow was being aimed skyward. Its size and construction suggested it was designed specifically for anti-dragon warfare, which meant Darius had either encountered dragons before or had prepared for this possibility. "Evasive flight!" Fyrax bellowed to his kin. "Scatter and maintain altitude!" The warning came just in time. The enormous crossbow released its first bolt, a spear-like projectile that whistled through the air toward a young blue dragon. The dragon veered sharply, but the bolt grazed its wing, drawing a roar of pain and causing it to falter mid-flight. "They're targeting the dragons," Logan realized. "Azura, we need to take out that weapon." Without waiting for Fyrax's approval, Logan and Azura dove toward the wagon. Soldiers below pointed and shouted warnings as they approached. The massive crossbow swiveled in their direction, its operators rushing to reload. "Faster!" Logan urged, lying flat against Azura's neck to reduce wind resistance. They were gambling everything on reaching the weapon before it could fire again. The crossbow operators finished loading, taking aim at the rapidly approaching target. Logan's heart hammered in his chest as he realized they might not make it in time. Then, from his peripheral vision, he saw a blur of crimson. Fyrax, diving at an even steeper angle, putting himself between the weapon and his daughter. "No!" Logan shouted, but it was too late. The crossbow fired. The massive bolt struck Fyrax in the shoulder, penetrating his scales. The great dragon roared in pain, but continued his dive, crashing directly into the wagon and destroying the weapon in an explosion of splintered wood and twisted metal. Soldiers scattered as Fyrax rolled across the ground, crushing several beneath his massive body before coming to a stop. "Father!" Azura's distressed chirp needed no translation. They landed beside the fallen dragon, Logan leaping from Azura's back before she had fully touched down. Fyrax lay on his side, breathing heavily, the enormous bolt protruding from his shoulder. Dark blood seeped around the wound, staining his crimson scales a deeper red. "Hold on," Logan said, examining the injury. "We need to remove the bolt." Fyrax's golden eyes fixed on Logan. "Beware," he rumbled weakly. "Darius approaches." Logan turned to see the warlord striding toward them, sword drawn, flanked by his elite guards. The man's face was a mask of fury and fascination. "So the rumors were true," Darius called. "Dragons have returned to the world, and apparently they've made pets of village boys." "We're not pets, and they're not beasts," Logan replied, standing protectively before the injured Fyrax. "They're allies and friends." Darius laughed coldly, touching, but ultimately irrelevant. "When I'm done here, both dragons and this village will be under my control. I'll be the first warlord in centuries to command dragon fire." "You understand nothing about dragons," Logan said, voice steady despite his fear. "They can't be controlled or commanded. They chose to help us because we showed them respect, not because we tried to conquer them." Azura moved to stand beside Logan, her body tense and ready to attack. Around them, the battle continued, but a small circle had cleared as soldiers from both sides recognized the confrontation for what it was, a pivotal moment that would determine the outcome. "Respect?" Darius scoffed. "Power respects only greater power, boy. Once I've killed this great beast, the others will learn their place." The warlord raised his sword and stepped forward. Azura hissed, spines fully erect, preparing to defend her father. But before either could act, a voice rang out from behind Logan. "That's far enough, Darius." Logan turned to see his uncle Mason approaching, bow drawn, and arrow aimed directly at the warlord's heart. He was joined by Hannah Sullivan and representatives from the other villages, all armed and forming a protective semicircle around Fyrax. "This dragon saved our village when no one else would," Mason declared. "We won't stand by while you threaten him." Darius's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. The battle around them had shifted. With Fyrax down, the dragons had redoubled their efforts, fury making them even more formidable. Darius's forces were beginning to falter under the combined assault of dragons and village defenders. "You're choosing beasts over your own kind," Darius demanded. "We're choosing allies over tyrants," Hannah Sullivan replied firmly. "The dragons have shown us more humanity than you ever have, Darius." The warlord's face contorted with rage. "Then you'll die with them." He lunged forward, sword aimed at Logan. Several things happened at once. Mason loosed his arrow, striking one of Darius's guards. Azura sprang forward, interposing herself between Logan and the warlord. And most surprisingly, Fyrax, despite his injury, swept his massive tail in a sudden movement that knocked Darius off his feet. The warlord crashed to the ground, his sword spinning from his grasp. Before he could recover, Azura pinned him with one clawed foot. Her teeth bared inches from his face. For the first time, genuine fear showed in Darius's eyes. "It's over, Darius," Logan said, stepping forward. "Call off your forces." The warlord glared up at him, defiance warring with self-preservation. Around them, the tide of battle had clearly turned. Dragons circled overhead, while on the ground, Darius's soldiers were either surrendering or retreating. After a long moment, Darius gave a curt nod. "Stand down!" he shouted to his remaining forces. "Stand down!" The command rippled across the battlefield, and gradually the fighting ceased. Weapons were lowered, then dropped as Darius's once proud army surrendered. Logan turned his attention back to Fyrax, kneeling beside the great dragon's wounded shoulder. "We need to remove the bolt," he said again. Several villagers stepped forward to help, including Julia Clark, who had been a healer before becoming a merchant. Together, they managed to extract the massive projectile, applying pressure to stem the bleeding afterward. "The wound is deep, but not fatal," Julia announced after examination. "Dragons must be remarkably resilient." "We are," Fyrax confirmed, his voice stronger now, "though I would not have risked myself for just any human." His golden gaze fixed on Logan. but for the one who saved my daughter, without hesitation." As the sun began to set over the valley, an unusual peace settled over Emberdale. Darius and his elite guards were bound and placed under heavy watch, while the remainder of his forces were disarmed and escorted to a temporary encampment outside the village. The dragon table, intended for the signing of the accord, instead became a makeshift council table where the future of the region was discussed. Representatives from all three visiting villages now spoke with conviction rather than skepticism about the benefits of alliance with dragonkind. What Darius attempted today will be tried by others once word spreads that dragons have returned, Mayor Collins observed soberly. We would be fools to reject an alliance that offers protection against such threats. And we would be equally foolish to ignore the knowledge dragons can share, added Rhys Franklin of High Vale, who had witnessed a dragon healing techniques applied to wounded villagers after the battle. There is much we can learn from each other. Logan sat quietly beside Azura, watching as the future of human-dragon relations was shaped before his eyes. It seemed incredible that just 6 months ago he had been a lonely boy, ridiculed for his kindness to animals. Now that same kindness had changed the course of history for his village and perhaps the world beyond. As the council continued its deliberations, Logan slipped away to check on Fyrax, who rested at the village's edge, his massive form illuminated by the setting sun. The great dragon's wound had been bandaged with cloths large enough to serve as sails for a small ship, and he appeared to be resting comfortably. "How are you feeling?" Logan asked, approaching the dragon's head. Fyrax opened one golden eye. "I have had worse injuries in my long life," he rumbled, "though few as meaningful." Logan sat beside the dragon, leaning against his warm scales. "I never thought my helping Azura would lead to all this." "Small acts of kindness often have the greatest consequences," Fyrax observed, "a lesson my kind learned long ago, and one it seems humans are beginning to remember." They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell over Emberdale. Lights appeared in windows, and the sounds of celebration began to rise from the village center as the tension of the day gave way to relief and joy. "What happens now?" Logan asked finally. "After the accord is signed?" "Now comes the difficult part," Fyrax replied. "Building trust between our kinds will take more than battles fought together, though that is a powerful beginning. It will require patience, understanding, and many more small acts of kindness." "Like helping an injured worm?" Logan suggested with a smile. "Precisely like that," Fyrax agreed, a rumble of amusement in his voice. Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Logan looked up to see a group of children from the village, led by none other than Tyler Grant. They hesitated at a respectful distance, eyes wide as they regarded the enormous dragon. "What is it?" Logan asked, rising to meet them. Tyler began, then gathered his courage. "We wanted to know if you would teach us how to help care for the dragons, especially the injured ones from the battle." Logan glanced at Fyrax, who inclined his massive head in approval. "I think that can be arranged," Logan said, unable to keep the smile from his face. "But you should know it's not just about bandaging wounds, it's about respect, patience, and listening, even when they don't use words you understand." "We want to learn," one of the younger children said earnestly. "Like you did." As Logan began explaining the basics of dragon care to the eager group, he caught sight of his Uncle Mason watching from nearby, pride evident in his expression. Beside him stood Hannah Sullivan, who nodded respectfully to Logan before turning to address Mason. "Your nephew has changed everything," she said, loud enough for Logan to hear. "We laughed at his kindness once. I don't think any of us will make that mistake again." Mason's reply was quiet, but clear in the evening air. "The Reed family has always produced great hunters, but perhaps what the world needs now isn't another hunter, but a bridge builder instead." Later that night, as most of the village slept, Logan sat on the roof of his uncle's cottage, gazing at the stars. Azura lay curled beside him, her warmth welcome against the night chill. In the distance, he could see the silhouettes of dragons perched on the surrounding mountains, standing guard over the valley. "We did it, Azura," he whispered, stroking her scales. "We changed everything." The young dragon made a soft, trilling sound of contentment, resting her head on his lap. Tomorrow would bring the formal signing of the Dragon Accord, the beginning of a new chapter in the history of both their kinds. There would be challenges ahead, misunderstandings to navigate, and likely more battles to fight. But for tonight, under the starlit sky, a boy who had once been mocked for his compassion could rest easy, knowing that kindness, even when ridiculed, sometimes changed the world in ways no one could have imagined. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a fitting day for making history. The dragon table had been moved to the center of the village square, where it caught the first rays of the rising sun. Around it gathered representatives from all 4 villages and the dragon clans, ready to formalize the alliance that had already been tested in battle. Logan stood with Azura at his side, watching as Fyrax, moving somewhat stiffly due to his injury but majestic nonetheless, approached the table. Hannah Sullivan stepped forward, carrying a massive scroll upon which the terms of the accord had been written in both human language and the symbolic script of dragonkind. "Today," she announced, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "we formalize what began with a simple act of kindness. When Logan Reed found an injured worm in our forest, he could not have known he was changing the course of history. Yet here we stand, humans and dragons together, ready to forge a future built on mutual respect rather than ancient fear." The signing ceremony was brief but powerful. Village leaders marked the document with ink, while dragons pressed their talons into soft wax seals. When it came Logan's turn to sign as the official dragon friend, he felt the weight of the moment, the culmination of a journey that had begun with a compassionate choice in the forest. As he set down the quill, a shadow passed overhead. Everyone looked up to see dozens of dragons circling the village, their scales gleaming in the morning light. Then, as if responding to an unheard signal, they released simultaneous jets of flame into the sky, creating a spectacular display of color and light, a dragon salute to honor the historic occasion. Cheers erupted from the gathered villagers, a sound that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. Children waved excitedly at the dragons they had begun to know by name. Adults who had once feared even the mention of such creatures now gazed upward with wonder and appreciation. Mason joined Logan as the ceremony concluded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said. "The old hunting lodge at the forest edge would make an excellent dragon way station, somewhere worms could rest when traveling between mountains and villages." "You'd give up your hunting lodge?" Logan asked, surprised. Mason smiled, the expression softening his weathered features. "I'm not giving it up. I'm finding a better use for it. Besides," he added with a wink, "I've discovered there's more satisfaction in tracking creatures to observe them than to hunt them. Perhaps you could teach me more about that." Before Logan could respond, a commotion at the village entrance caught everyone's attention. A small delegation was arriving, representatives from a village beyond the mountains, drawn by rumors of dragons returning to the world. Their expressions as they beheld the great beasts in the flesh ranged from terror to awe. "And so it begins," Fyrax rumbled, coming to stand beside Logan. "The ripples of your kindness spread further still." Logan watched as Hannah Sullivan and the other leaders moved to greet the newcomers, already falling into their roles as ambassadors between worlds. Azura nudged his hand with her snout, making a questioning chirp. "Yes," he told her, understanding her unspoken query. "Let's show them what friendship between our kinds really means." Together, boy and dragon walked forward to meet the future they had helped create. A future born from a moment of compassion in a forest, when a child chose kindness over fear and changed everything. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden light over Emberdale, dragons soared overhead, their shadows dancing across the ground below, no longer harbingers of fear, but symbols of protection, wisdom, and the extraordinary power of unexpected alliances. And though the challenges ahead would be many, the foundation had been laid for something remarkable, a world where dragons and humans walked together, where ancient prejudices gave way to new understandings, and where a boy once mocked for his gentleness with beasts had become a bridge between worlds. For in the end, it was not strength or weapons or even dragonfire that had saved them all, but something far simpler and far more powerful, the courage to be kind, even when kindness is ridiculed. And that, perhaps, was the greatest magic of all. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.